Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Life Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Seattle rain has a way of minding its own business, steady, fine, and relentless. It glossed the bay and the glass of my bedroom window while I crouched on the carpet palm on cold steel, turning the safe's dial like I'd done for 3 decades. 32 to the right, 18 left, 32 right. The clicks rolled under my fingers, a rhythm my hands remembered better than a hymn. I lifted the handle. The door gave with a gentle tisk, the kind of sound that used to make me feel secure. Shelves, felt lining, air. No turquoise bracelet from that road trip through Arizona. No silver brooch my mother wore to church. No thin gold bangles I'd bought after each of my children was born. The safe looked like a miniature, unrented apartment, clean, echoing, and different. Behind me, the floorboard that always complained did it again. Looking for something? Evelyn Tessa's voice arrived with that careful Seattle smile. Gentle toned sandpaper meaning. I stood. She was framed in the doorway, shoulder against the jamb, bun too tight leggings with a minimalist logo, the picture of good habits. Over the last year, she'd filled this house with words like declutter, flow, and intentional. They sounded like verbs until you realized they were a strategy. My jewelry, I said. Oh, she chirped as if I'd asked about a missing dish towel. We donated the old pieces. You don't wear them. They're just storage stress. I repeated. Me and Mason, she said quickly, then softened. Mostly me, but it's for the best. You told me yourself things weigh people down. I looked at her, then at the safe. The room smelled faintly of cedar and the lemon oil I used on the dresser my husband and I bought the summer after he got tenure. Rain ticked the window. In the hallway, the heat kicked on with a hollow woof. A house remembers even when people don't. You're right, I said. I don't need them. She let out a little breath, relieved, ready to pivot into a TED Talk about clean living. My lawyer does. The relief slid off her face like water. For a second, her eyes forgot to pretend. Evelyn, This is getting blown out of proportion. They were costume pieces, really. Sentimental, sure, but... The turquoise bracelet is not costume, I said. Neither is my mother's brooch. She tried again. We can talk about this when Mason gets home. He didn't want to worry you. Then he shouldn't have taken what wasn't his. Tessa's smile tightened. I think you're tired. And it's a lot to manage a big home alone. Let me make tea. We'll reset. She vanished down the hall, light-footed, leaving a draft I didn't know this room could make. I sat on the bed and let the safe stand open its emptiness, the only honest thing in the house. Outside, a ferry moaned across Elliott Bay, a long, low horn that found the ribs and stayed there. On the dresser, an old photo, my husband and me on the pier, my hair wild from the wind, his hand at the small of my back. He'd been a careful man devoted to receipts and dates and the habit of not owing anyone anything he couldn't pay by month's end. We used to joke that he courted the ledger before he courted me. He'd died in a hospital room, painted a color meant to soothe. Mason stood on one side of the bed, Tessa on the other, already talking about keeping me supported, which turned out to be a word that meant managed. After the funeral, they came with casserole dishes, then with a contractor who said the kitchen wanted to breathe. The brass handles which didn't breathe were replaced with matte black pulls which did. The leather chair by the front window was bulky. Then it was on consignment, then it was gone. A locksmith changed the deadbolt for safety, and I nodded because who argues with safety? Tessa did a sweep through the closets with donation boxes humming along to a podcast about owning less and living more. When I needed my bank card for Sarah's 12th birthday gift, Tessa told me she'd streamlined the accounts. Subscriptions auto-paid. Groceries delivered. One less thing for you to juggle, she said, handing me a reusable tote as consolation. I stood at the party with empty hands and watched my granddaughter look past me at a mountain of wrapped boxes I hadn't contributed to. You'd be amazed how loud a paper plate can sound when it shakes. Nora from the church choir called to invite me to Wednesday rehearsal, then called back the next day to say maybe I should rest. She'd heard I was getting a little mixed up sometimes. I asked who told her. She hesitated. Oh, honey, she said, as if someone had already decided I needed soft vowels. People think aging is a cliff. It's not. It's a hallway with lights that flicker one by one while you're still walking straight. Downstairs, cups clinked. Tessa laid coasters as if they were evidence. I closed the safe and spun the dial out of habit, an old ritual to close what couldn't be closed. On the nightstand, my notebook, brown leather, hand-sized, the one with every major repair and expense since the first mortgage. I'd moved it from the kitchen drawer when the kitchen stopped feeling like mine. I slipped it under my sweater into the warmth where things stayed put. On the way to the kitchen, I passed the entryway mirror. The face there looked like me without my jewelry, but not less. Just unadorned. I stood a second, then went on. Tessa had stacked 2 mugs and arranged a small tea ceremony on the quartz island she'd insisted on. Her smile was back in place. Chamomile, it's good for. I'll take it without the lecture, I said, and the smile cracked a hairline fracture. We stood across from each other like 2 people measuring a room before they buy it. She gestured at the stools. I remained standing. Tessa, I said, where did you take the bracelet? She blinked. Evelyn, I told you donated. The thrift by the co-op. They support transitional housing. The bracelet, I repeated. She took a breath. I can call later. They might, you know how shops are. They put things out fast. Don't bother. Her chin lifted. Are we going to turn this into a thing? It already is a thing. She reached behind her for a dish towel and found nothing to wipe. Mason will be home soon, she said, and there it was again, the shield she always raised. Mason the busy, Mason the overwhelmed, Mason the son who could be wielded. He's exhausted this week. Can we please not attack him with drama? Drama is when people act, I said. We're past acting. Then write down what you think you're owed, she snapped, losing the varnish, and we'll figure out a reasonable, what I'm owed. The words felt strange in my mouth. Owed belonged to utility bills and parking tickets, not to Mother's. We looked at each other. Somewhere in the wall, the refrigerator hummed into a new cycle. The house listened. I set the mug down untouched and walked back to the bedroom. The carpet gave under my feet where the pad had thinned. Small domestic truths no influencer ever mentions. I closed the door. Slide the lock, old brass not yet matted into invisibility, and took the leather notebook out again. I turned to the first page I'd left blank after the funeral and wrote 3 lines with a steady hand, safe empty, bracelet gone, call Harold. I took my phone from the top drawer where I keep what I actually don't want to misplace. My thumb hovered over old numbers I hadn't used since I was wearing black that winter, the church office, the community college bursar, the woman at the florist who still sends me a poinsettia every December because my husband insisted on over-tipping. Then I scrolled to Harold Kent. He'd kept a corner office long after he retired because men like Harold never fully learn how to step out of a suit. I pressed the call. It rang twice. Evelyn. His voice carried the same dry humor it always had, as if the world were mildly ridiculous but salvageable. It's me, I said. A beat. What do you need, he asked. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't apologize for the hour or the rain or for being a woman who had let her house grow quiet. I told him. Harold listened the way old friends do when the air has already told half the story. No interruptions, just the scratch of a pen and the faint clink of a ceramic mug on his desk. His office sat 3 floors above a ferry dock gift shop that sold postcards of gulls and sunsets. Through the window, the bay looked ironed flat by the rain. I need you to say it plainly, he said when I finished. What's missing and who had access? Jewelry from the safe, I said. Tessa had the run of the house. Mason too, but he's never known the combination. Harold tapped the pen on his notepad, his title. In my name alone, I said. We refinanced after his tenure. We did it that way on purpose. Bank. I took the leather notebook from my bag, slid a rubber band off it, and set it on the desk, as if I were placing a hand on a Bible. I keep this. Tessa moved the debit card and says she streamlined our expenses. Auto-pay subscriptions, groceries. I'm locked out of the online portal she set up. Harold didn't hide the frown. All right, 2 tracks. First, we confirm ownership and capacity. Second, we follow the money. I'll draft releases for the bank. You'll get a cognitive workup from Dr. Nguyen at UW. She's thorough and discreet. He wrote names and numbers on a yellow sticky note and slid it across the desk with a lawyer's economy of movement. Then he opened a drawer and produced a small black square with a clip. What's that? I asked. A button camera, he said. Clips behind a blouse placket. Audio's clean enough for a courtroom. Washington's a one-party consent state. You are a party. I turned the square in my palm. It weighed less than the smallest brooch my mother owned. Evelyn, he said, voice level, you don't argue your way out of this sort of situation. You document your way through it. When I left, the rain had turned from mist to beaded strings on the sidewalk. A bus hissed low at the corner. I tucked the sticky note into my wallet and the little camera into my coat pocket where a packet of tissues used to live. Dr. Nguyen's clinic smelled like eucalyptus and printer toner. The exam was more puzzle box than stethoscope, a clock face drawn from memory. A slow run of numbers backward, a story to repeat 10 minutes later. She watched my hands as much as my eyes. When it was over, she printed 3 crisp pages and stapled them with a precise click. You're steady, she said. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're talking about something I can't measure. On the walk home from the bus stop, I tucked the papers behind the liner of my leather notebook and pressed the flap closed. The bay breathed salt into the neighborhood. Somewhere someone was grilling fish under a covered patio. The smoke smelled like last summer. At the front door, the new deadbolt balked. I jiggled, then found the angle. Inside, the fridge hummed at a higher pitch than usual, as if it were trying to keep time with the rain. Tessa was at the island with her laptop open and 3 glossy interior magazines fanned like a peacock tail. "Hey," she said without looking up. Mason texted, "He's slammed. He'll be late." I hung my coat, slipped the little camera into the pocket of a button-front blouse, and went to the sink for a glass of water. The thread of the camera's clip tugged against the cotton as it settled. It was a small, practical weight. Tessa closed a magazine and slid her finger down her phone. "You don't mind if I schedule a furniture pickup for Friday, do you?" The consignment place had a cancellation. She set the phone face down, a gesture that looked kind and wasn't. "It's just the sideboard and the lamp by the window. You never turn it on." "That lamp belonged to my father," I said, not loudly. "It's harsh light," she said. "We'll find something softer." I turned and let the camera catch the room, the quartz island, the matte black pulls, the absence where the leather chair used to sit. "Where did you donate the bracelet?" I asked, as if I were asking where she put the nutmeg. "The Co-op thrift," she said. "The one with the mural of a carrot." "Name?" She blinked. "It's the Co-op," she said, as if Co-op were a legal entity with receipts. I set the glass in the sink. "All right." That night, when the house was quiet, except for the dryer turning 2 bath towels into something less honest than cotton, I took the laptop that still remembered my late husband's password and opened my email. The bank had slipped an alert into a promotions folder, a monthly statement ready to view. I waited for the spinner wheel to finish its slow revolution and read the numbers until the blue light stung. 14 months of streamlining numbered themselves into a shape furniture stores, with names that seemed to apologize for being expensive subscription boxes that promised better sleep, a boutique lighting company in Ballard, a wellness retreat deposit that cost more than the down payment on our first car, and a scatter of cash withdrawals in neat, round amounts. The total rose like a tide line on a basement wall. $76,800. I copied the statement to a thumb drive from the desk and slid it into the notebook's inner pocket where I used to hide the spare recipe for my husband's cornbread. In the morning, I took the Route 13 bus down to Rainier Avenue and stepped into Rainier Loan and Gold, where the glass cases were full of stories with the endings written in pawn tags. The man behind the counter wore a tie with tiny anchors on it and a ring that belonged on a different hand. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyes already measuring what category of help I might want. "I'm looking for a turquoise bracelet," I said. Silver setting stones the color of a cold pool hairline, crack on the third oval. "It came in sometime in the last 2 weeks." He shrugged the way people do when their job is to make you shrug first, then turn to ledger. "We get a lot of turquoise." "Then I'm looking for the paperwork," I said. "Under the name Tessa Moore." He didn't reach for the ledger again. He reached for a plastic bin, pulled a stack of tickets, and ran his thumb down the edges. "We don't give out client information," he said. I took a breath. "I'm not asking for your client list. I'm asking if you've seen my property." "Ma'am," he said. Behind him, a wall calendar with a fish on it said it was still last month. The case nearest the register held a tray of rings, one of them a cheap imitation of my mother's brooch in miniature, if a brooch could be a ring. I set my driver's license on the counter, then a small card from Harold's office, then the 3 pages from Dr. Nguyen, face down, the letterhead visible like a watermark. I didn't tap them. I didn't push. I let the pile say what it said. He looked at the license, then the card, then me. "Hold on," he said, and disappeared through a door. Beside the guns are not allowed sign. When he came back, he didn't have the bracelet, but he had an answer as sturdy as a name. "Ticket in the name of Moore," he said. "Turquoise bracelet, silver brooch, a couple gold bangles. 31-4. He watched my face while he said the number. "Can you copy the ticket?" I asked. "I can't," he said, "but I can hold the items from going on the floor for a week if the fees are current. After that, it's the shelf." I nodded once, "Thank you." Outside, the sky had lightened to a color that wasn't quite blue. I stood under the awning of a Vietnamese bakery that smelled like sugar and coffee and texted Nora from the church choir. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I typed. "It's Evelyn." She called instead of writing. "Honey," she said, and this time the word didn't feel like a blanket someone was tucking around my mouth. "I'm here. I need to ask you something simple," I said. "Did Tessa ever tell you I was getting confused?" Nora's inhale was small and honest. "She mentioned you were having some trouble with mornings," Nora said. I didn't pass it along. I thought it sounded like Tessa. "Thank you," I said. "And Evelyn?" "Yes. You sing on Wednesday. You sound like yourself when you sing." On the way home, the bus windows fogged and cleared like a breath. At the top of our street, a crow landed on the power line and shook rain from its feathers like confetti he didn't ask for. The house smelled like lemon oil again. Tessa stood at the dining table with a roll of blue painter's tape and a Sharpie tagging the underside of the sideboard drawers. "Inventory," she said brightly when I came in. "Helps consignment track pieces. Transparency builds trust." I slipped past her and set my notebook on the bedspread, opened it to a fresh page, and wrote in small square letters, LNG ticket in Moore name, $31,400, bank $76,800 streamlining. I placed the 3 pages from Dr. Nguyen behind the new note. Then I clipped the little camera to the inner seam of my blouse, closed the notebook, and pressed my palm over the leather until the warmth from my skin traveled through it. The dryer clicked off downstairs. The house exhaled. I pulled out my phone, found a number I hadn't used in years, and let the ring climb once, then twice, then 3 times, until the line picked up in Portland, with my sister's voice steady as a plumb line. "June," I said. "It's me." June answered like we'd hung up an hour ago. "Do you need me to drive or sign?" "Both," I said, "if you can." "Text me the address and a window," she said. "I'll bring my stamp." She arrived 2 days later, Portland plates damp from I-5 and a tote bag full of forms. June wore her hair pulled back and her reading glasses on a chain like a grandmother, pretending she wasn't preparing to read someone their rights. She hugged me in the doorway longer than we were raised to, then stepped back and surveyed the house the way a carpenter studies a wall, listening for hollows. "Where's Mason?" she asked. "Late," I said. "And the wife?" "In the kitchen, inventorying my past." June clicked her pen. "Let's give your past a file number." We spread out at the dining table. Harold joined by video, his tie slightly askew, a kind of mercy. We worked without gossip. June labeled tabs Title Bank, Medical Pawn Audio. She slipped Dr. Nguyen's assessment into a clear sleeve with a sound a little like a blessing. I set the thumb drive next to the sleeve like a small, stubborn witness. Harold's voice came through the laptop speaker with courtroom diction. "Here's what we'll need in plain English: an acknowledgement of misappropriation, a repayment agreement with dates, a voluntary renunciation of any claim to fixtures and contents, and a notice to vacate with a reasonable timeline. We'll include a written confirmation of capacity for good measure." June wrote each title on a separate line and drew neat boxes for signatures. "I'll notarize in the room," she said. Nobody walks out wondering what they signed. Nora from the choir arrived with a box of lemon bars and a cardigan heavy enough to count as armor. She set the box down and squeezed my hand. "You sing first," she said quietly. "Then you talk." By late afternoon, the house smelled like sugar and paper. The rain went from steady to absent the way rain does here, leaving only a shine on everything that dared go outside. Tessa moved through the rooms with blue tape and a marker, crouching to write on the underside of a drawer, standing to label a lamp base. Her efficiency was a performance she understood better than any song. At 6, I texted my older 2, "Come by at 7. Quietly, please." They answered with thumbs and hearts and the efficient grammar of grown children trying not to say the wrong thing. I set the living room, the old way chair, angled to face the window side table, squared to the rug lamp on the one my father left humming faintly, a filament glow that made people look like themselves. I put Harold's stack in a manila folder and slid it under the couch cushion where the springs still held stubborn. Tessa floated in holding a tray of glasses with lemon slices balanced on the rims like little decisions. "We're having a good night, okay," she said. "No negativity." "I'm having a legal night," I said. She laughed in a bright key and set the tray down. "Mason won't want a scene. Mason will get a conversation," I said. At 7, the front door opened with the careful quiet of adults walking back into their childhood home. Lauren first, then Charles behind her. They hugged me fast like we were swapping oxygen, then sat on the sofa as if it might misinterpret them. June nodded once at each and handed them a single typed page, witness statement voluntary. She didn't say sign later. She didn't say if you're comfortable. She let the paper do its job. Tessa stayed standing, glass in hand, smile steady. "What are we doing?" she asked, as if we were voting on a movie. "We're talking," I said. Mason came in 5 minutes later, windblown and apologizing to the air. He kissed my cheek and smelled like wet hooded sweatshirt and office coffee. He saw June's stamp and Harold's face on the laptop screen and read the room the way a man hears his own name in a crowded bar. "What is this?" he asked. "A meeting," I said. "Our house, our rules." Tessa slid an arm around his waist. "Baby, let's not. You're exhausted." He looked at her hand on him, then at me. "Okay," he said. "Talk." I didn't clear my throat. I didn't preface. I took the leather notebook from the armrest and placed it on the coffee table. Then I laid out what fit in a few sentences: safe, empty. Bracelet, brooch, bangles. Rainier loan and gold confirming a ticket under more. Bank statements reflecting $76,800 in withdrawals and purchases I didn't authorize. Dr. Nguyen's assessment. Ends. I put each document where a person would put cards if they intended to win a hand without tricking anyone. Tessa's smile thinned into something practical. "You have no proof those items are yours," she said. "People donate things. You told me. The bracelet has a crack on the third stone," I said. "The brooches clasp sticks. The bangles are sized for a wrist that cooked 4 dinners every day for 20 years and still clapped in church. Those are mine." She looked at Mason the way you look at a witness you brought expecting him to be on your side. "Tell her we were clearing space," she said. "Tell her we agreed." Mason didn't answer right away. He bent, picked up the Dr. Nguyen letter, read the header, then read the first paragraph like the air needed the words spoken inside it. Tessa's voice sharpened. "You know how overwhelmed I've been," she said. You know how much I do to keep this place running. You keep it busy, I said. That's different. June clicked her pen open and set it down a metronome. I reached for the small clip camera and set it next to the notebook without flourish. Then I pressed play. Tessa's voice filled the room in a tone she reserved for friends and speakers at panels. You don't mind if I schedule a furniture pickup for Friday, do you? It's just the sideboard and the lamp by the window. You never turn it on. The audio caught the scrape of her marker under the drawer, the casual certainty of someone cataloging the past tense. Tessa glared at the device as if it had betrayed a confidence. That's illegal, she said. It isn't, I said. Ask Harold. On the screen, Harold lifted a hand. One party consent, he said. She's the party. I slid the bank statement forward, the columns highlighted like a choir with the loud parts marked. 76,800, I said. That is not organizing. That is taking. Tessa's glass trembled, then stilled. She set it down with the care of someone placing a vase they do not own. We talked about some of those. The retreat was for my mental health. The lighting, this house is dark. The furniture, this is what happens when you update a space. Costs add up. It's not theft, Evelyn. It's stewardship. You stewarded yourself to Ballard and back, Lauren said, voice trimmed down to wire. Charles leaned forward. If you thought Mom agreed, you'd have had her sign something he said, with a date, with the account number, with a pen we all could see. Tessa's mouth went flat. I took the folder from under the cushion and placed 4 documents on the table in a square. Acknowledgement of misappropriation, agreement to repay, notice to vacate, renunciation of claim. The paper smelled faintly of toner and lemon sugar. This is ugly, Tessa, whispered the first true thing she'd said all evening. It's accurate, I said. Mason set his elbows on his knees and covered his mouth like a man watching something he'd paid to see but didn't want to witness. He didn't look at Tessa. He looked at the bracelet he couldn't see. Harold's voice stayed neutral. The terms are standard for cleaning up a mess without moving to litigation, he said. June slid the pen across the table. You sign what is true, she said, and I notarize what you've said with your hand. Tessa stared at the acknowledgement form like it might start reciting back at her. You're trying to make me admit to crime, she said. You're trying to make this look like housekeeping, I said. Nora cleared her throat in the armchair by the window. Tessa, she said almost kindly, you told the alto section Evelyn was getting mixed up in the mornings. You told us not to call. Tessa flinched as if sound had weight. I said she needed quiet, she said. I never said. You said exactly that, Nora replied, eyes steady. I have a good ear. The room held still. The lamp hummed its one note. The refrigerator fell silent as if it knew this part didn't need accompaniment. I placed my palm on the leather notebook. The house is mine, I said. It is titled in my name alone. I did not sign power of attorney. I did not authorize the sale, donation, or consignment of my belongings. I did not authorize withdrawals from my account. I am not confused. I lifted my hand. You may read, I said to Tessa, or you may listen while I read aloud. She pressed her lips together and reached for the pen. Mason's breath left him in a sound that wasn't quite a word. He looked at his shoes, then at the window, then at the floor between us, like there might be a map there none of us had seen. June turned the acknowledgement so it faced Tessa, the way a nurse turns a glass of water toward a patient who won't ask. The pages waited patient as paper. Tessa held the pen without moving. The blue tape on the sideboard flapped once in a draft and went still. Nora opened the lemon bars and set the box within reach of a table that hadn't hosted a fair fight in years. Mason lifted his head and finally looked at his wife, then at me, then at June's quiet stamp waiting beside the signatures. He said my name once like a test for an echo. I answered the only way there was to answer, by standing straighter in my own living room. The pen made a small sound against the paper, a sound that didn't belong to anyone in particular until June wrote her stamp beside it. She pressed once lifted, checked the seal like a baker checking a crust, then nodded. Tessa had signed the acknowledgement first. The repayment agreement followed, then the renunciation, then the notice to vacate. Her hand shook on the date line. Mason watched the numbers form as if he were watching weather. June slid the pages into clear sleeves, wiped the stamp with a square of cloth from her bag, and clicked her pen closed. Harold's voice came calm through the laptop speaker. Make 2 copies tonight, he said, 1 for Tessa, 1 for you. I'll send scans to counsel in the morning. Tessa stood glassy-eyed and brittle. I need my things, she said. Take what's yours, I said, not what's mine. She moved through the house with a suitcase and a trash bag, the way a person moves through a house in a dream, fast not seeing the edges. The blue tape labels she'd made for consignment flapped as she brushed past them. Mason followed her up the stairs, then down, carrying a box he set by the door without looking at it. On the porch, the rain had paused. The wet smell of cedar rose from the porch rail like something newly cut. When the door closed behind her, the house went quiet in a way I recognized. Not the silence of being ignored, but the kind that lets you hear the clock. June exhaled a breath she'd been holding. "Let's copy," she said, and we did printer light. Blinking pages sliding out warm and certain, Harold signed off with a small salute. Nora wrapped 2 lemon bars in wax paper for Mason and set them on the side table. Lauren rinsed the glasses as if the sink needed convincing it could be useful again. Mason sat on the edge of the coffee table and didn't reach for the food. "Mom," he said, and then couldn't find the rest. The lamp hummed. I touched his shoulder. He nodded once, twice, then stood and went upstairs to the room that had been a boys' room, then a guest room, then a storage room for neatly folded intentions. The next morning, Harold sent a demand letter to Rainier Loan and Gold with the file numbers June had assigned, citing pledge and conversion, and asking that identified items be held as potential evidence. The shop owner returned his call within the hour with a voice that had decided not to argue. "We'll keep them off the floor for 7 days," he said. "Fees are current through Friday." Harold also put in a report with Adult Protective Services, more form than feeling a grid of boxes you could check to make harm-fit government lines. He told me APS cases could sit a while. The point was the record. By afternoon, a courier rang the bell. The box was taped like someone didn't trust tape. Inside, newspaper crumpled around metal, the turquoise bracelet, the silver brooch, the bangles. The bracelet's third stone showed its old hairline crack. The brooch's clasp still stuck. I sat at the table and let the weight of them rest in my palm. Jewelry is always heavier than you think. That's part of why people pawn it. I didn't put them in the safe. I set them on the dresser like house guests who had come home and needed to breathe. Tessa's lawyer called Harold within 2 days. She sounded tired and expensive. "My client is willing to discuss a property transfer in lieu of cash repayment," she said. "A studio condominium in Tacoma, market value approximately $82,000, deeded to her by her grandmother last year. She proposes to tender title and make monthly payments on the balance for 18 months. I could hear Harold's pen above the line. "We'll need a title search," he said, and an acknowledgement of wrongdoing written in her hand. No contact language. "Payment schedule dates, certain default clause." "Understood," the lawyer said. June drove back up for the signing. The condo's title came back clean, no liens, taxes current. A homeowners association with rules about quiet hours and potted plants. The lawyer spread the deed transfer on my table. Tessa arrived without mascara and without the tray smile. She had the look of a person who had stopped rehearsing. June set the acknowledgement form directly in front of her, a simple lined sheet with a header and space enough to say a thing once. Tessa took the pen. "What do you want me to write?" she asked. "Truth," June said. Tessa wrote in block letters, slow and deliberate, the way you write on forms where someone else will judge your penmanship, that she had pawned items not hers, that she had withdrawn funds from an account she did not own, that she had misrepresented my capacity, that she accepted responsibility. She signed full name, middle initial, date. June notarized with the same care she uses for birth certificates and wills. We signed the deed transfer last. The paper didn't look like money. It looked like a promise someone had agreed to keep. Tessa took the no-contact order and read it, lips silent, then signed. When she left, she didn't look around the room. In the weeks that followed, the house opened rooms the way a body opens lungs after a long-held breath. I changed the deadbolt back to a simple brass that turned like a thought. Mason helped me move the sideboard back into its old place and took down the blue tape with a patient thumb. He worked quietly, not for show, the way men work after they've run out of apologies. On Wednesdays, I stood with Nora in the altos and sang under light that made every face softer. She gave me a folding chair with a cushion that remembered who had sat in it before. Potluck came after practice. I brought deviled eggs and left with a tub of ambrosia salad I didn't ask for. The smell of coffee at church is the same in every city. It's a standard you can count on. Mason asked if he could come by on Wednesdays after rehearsal, and I said yes. He learned to cook clam chowder out of a cookbook that had belonged to my mother. Paper sleeves sliding out of the spine like loose letters. He scalded the milk once and said a word he hadn't said in front of me before, then laughed, then tried again. We set the table with the bowls that had somehow survived both the move from our first house and Tessa's improvements. He ate the lemon bars Nora sent him like medicine. Harold brought over a new safe, smaller, heavier, a combination I set by myself and didn't say out loud. He sat at the kitchen table and read the will my husband and I had written with him years ago. June came up a second time to notarize the update we made at the margin, not changing the heart, just making the edges less likely to fray. On a Tuesday, a plain envelope arrived from Tessa's lawyer with a cashier's check for the first installment and a cover letter typed in a font that wanted to be neutral. The studio's deed showed up at the county office in my name. The assessor's database, public and unforgiving, displayed the change by dinner time. No confetti, just a line item that said what it needed to say. Mason drove me to Tacoma on a Saturday to see the place. The building was clean and unremarkable, the sort of box cities build for people who need roofs without drama. The studio had light scuffed floors and a view of a slice of water if you leaned. A neighbor in slippers wheeled a bicycle down the hall and said good morning like he meant it. We measured walls with a piece of twine and a pocket knife and argued gently over where a bed should go, the way people argue when the stakes are small and the history is not. "Do you want this?" I asked him, meaning more than the square footage. He looked around. "I want to make something right," he said. He didn't say how. He didn't need to. That night in my kitchen, he took the first cashier's check from the envelope, turned it over, and signed the receipt line Harold had enclosed. He dated it, then looked at me for where to place it. I slid open the leather notebook and pointed to a new tab June had added payments. He set the slip under the clip, squared it to the margin. Nora stopped by with a hymn list and a pie. June texted a picture of her Stampery ink pad. Harold sent a message that only said filed. The bracelet sat in a dish by my bed, not because I was careless, but because I wanted to see it in the morning. The house regained its sounds. The radiator ticked in the back bedroom. The front steps creaked in the way that always made my husband announce himself so he wouldn't scare me when he came home late. I wiped the lemon oil onto the dresser again, and the wood drank it like it had missed being tended to. Mason filled a donation box with his own thing shoes. He didn't wear a game console. He didn't have time for a sweatshirt in a color that never suited him. He wrote Mason donate in thick marker and set it by the door. He didn't label anything else. We ate chowder and stacked bowls and left the lamp on. The house held the light without apology. The safe clicked closed and stayed closed. The bracelet's crack ran through its stone like a vein. It didn't ask to be fixed. It asked to be kept. Spring didn't ask permission. It showed up in the strip of soil beneath the kitchen window where chives pushed through like green punctuation and the lilac out front woke in a rush. I cracked the window and let the cooler air ride the smell of coffee into the room. The bracelet lay in its dish beside the sink. I touched the hairline crack with a fingertip, the way people touch Bible pages when they're not reading them but mean to. Mason came over with the paint chips fanned like playing cards and a pencil behind his ear. He took off his shoes, lined them at the mat, without thinking, and set the chips on the table. "North wall wants light," he said. "South can take deeper color." He had learned how the studio held afternoon sun and where the floors creaked if you crossed in a hurry. He spoke about the space like it was a person he was getting to know without performing it for anyone. We spent Saturdays there. He spackled and sanded. I taped edges and read labels out loud because the type on cans is smaller now. We ate sandwiches sitting on the floor with our backs against the baseboard and called the place by its street, not its unit, as if it were older and had seen more. He put down new planks that clicked into each other like a private handshake. He learned to cut trim without swearing. I learned not to hover. On Wednesdays, the studio stayed empty. He came for chowder and lemon bars and to carry the trash to the curb when I forgot which week was recycling. After dinner, we walked the block the long way and then the short way, as if the house needed to see us circle it like a good dog. Nora's porch light lifted the corner of the street the same time every evening and made the stop sign look kind. She waved a folded hymn list at me like a secret note. The second cashier's check came on a Friday. I put it in the leather notebook under the clip June had labeled. Mason signed the receipt with the careful handwriting he had in 3rd grade when he wanted the teacher to see the effort. He watched me file it the way someone watches a door close that used to swing open for the wrong reasons. By summer, the studio looked like a place where somebody could start again without apologizing to the walls. Mason leaned a mattress against the window and built a frame that didn't wobble. He installed a bar for a curtain and argued with a level that insisted his eye was wrong. He bought 2 plates and 1 good skillet and a wooden spoon from a church rummage sale that still smelled like someone else's stew. He didn't move in. He kept a toothbrush in my upstairs bathroom and a spare shirt in the hall closet, and said he'd take the studio when he could hear it ask. I didn't press. The point wasn't to open a door. It was to have one. The choir sang through June and July. Nora put me on a high harmony that threaded like a wire and didn't call attention to itself. The church smelled like floor wax and old paperback pages. After practice, I walked home with the folder of hymns under my arm and waved at the neighbor who watered his tomatoes with a measuring cup because his hose was always kinked. The lamp in my window leaned its filament glow against the glass. Tessa's payments arrived when they were due. The cover letters grew shorter. The checks looked the same. They made a small stack under the clip that didn't impress anyone but kept its place. In August, an envelope came with no check and a letter that used more air than paper. It was from her, not her lawyer. 4 lines. She said she'd gotten a job answering phones at a school. She said she was keeping up. She said she knew writing didn't undo anything. She said thank you for not making it something worse than it already was. I put the letter in the back of the notebook behind a tab with no label because I didn't feel like naming that part. June drove up first Sunday with a bag of peaches and a notary stamp she kept in a tin that used to hold buttons. We sat at the table and didn't talk about forms. We ate a peach over the sink like people who know juice is better than neatness. She pressed her finger to the crack in the bracelet and said, "Still pretty, as if that solved anything and somehow solved enough." Harold stopped by to return a casserole dish he hadn't borrowed. He touched the safe with a palm flat like a doctor listening to a chest, and nodded once without telling the joke he stored for occasions like that. He asked if the radiator in the back room still ticked. It did. We both listened to it for a second, the way people listen to a memory that makes a sound. September brought shorter days that sharpened the edges of things. On a Friday, Mason and I sat on the back steps with mugs of chowder warm in our hands and watched fog flatten the yard into one plane where the grass, the flower bed, and the stepping stones behaved like they had agreed to keep quiet. He told me he had taken a long run without headphones and counted mailboxes when he got tired. He said he had a date to meet with a counselor at the clinic near the studio. He didn't make a speech about it. He didn't use words other people had taught him. He said, "It's time." I nodded and asked if he wanted more chowder. He did. When he decided to move into the studio, he did it on a Tuesday. We put boxes in the trunk that weren't full because there's no reason to strain for pride. He carried the mattress down himself with a blank face that made neighbors offer hands he politely declined. We made the bed with new sheets I bought without announcing I was paying. He stood in the doorframe and looked at the room, then at me, then at the room again like he was testing an echo. He hugged me with his chin on my shoulder as if he remembered the height inventory of childhood. I drove home and parked in the spot under the maple that sheds early. The house welcomed me the way houses do when they aren't being asked to be something else. I turned on the lamp. The filament hummed. I boiled water and poured it over tea because I didn't want coffee at that hour. The safe waited in the bedroom like a quiet appliance that works when you ask and otherwise minds its own business. The next morning, the bracelet went back inside. I turned the dial and listened to the click that ends arguments. I didn't write the combination anywhere. I didn't need to. I held the wheel a second longer than necessary and felt the weight of the door light against my hand before it settled closed. October pressed rain against the glass again. Nora taped a flyer for the choir's fall concert to the church door and sent me a photo of it, crooked with the caption, "Fix later." June mailed me a photograph from 25 years ago, my husband at the grill with a spatula and a grin that told you exactly what you were getting for dinner. The edges had softened to a color that looked like memory even if it wasn't. Mason came by on a Wednesday with a paper bag from the bakery and his old key, which I didn't need him to return, but he returned anyway. He laid it on the counter without drama. He ate a lemon bar and left half behind because he had somewhere to be that wasn't here. He put his hand on the door jamb the way his father used to, not to steady himself, but to mark the passage. He said, "Back Friday," like a question for a schedule, not a plea. "Friday," I said. After he left, I stood in the hallway with the lamp on and listened to the refrigerator change gears. I straightened the picture frame on the table. I slid the leather notebook back into the drawer where it had lived before anyone thought to tidy it away. The drawer closed with the familiar bump it had always had. The house breathed. The lilac held its shape despite the rain. When the clock in the front room moved to the next minute, it made the sound it has made all my adult life. It didn't ask for applause. It didn't announce itself. It marked the time and let the room be the room. I poured more tea and watched the rain polish the street. The safe stayed closed. The lamp held the window. The house kept the light. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.